We've been having a little bit of technical difficulty. Okay, so yep, we are live. Fabulous. Hi, welcome back to our Pillar educational lectures called Ask an Expert. My name is Amanda Wroblewski, and I coordinate the BCH Pillar program. For those of you that aren't familiar with us, we are a service that's part of the Boulder Community Health System that offers service navigation and short-term case management for connection to treatment for substance use disorders and the management of chronic pain without the use of narcotics. So our contact info will be on the resource slide at the end of the presentation tonight, so please don't hesitate to reach out with questions. And again, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And whether you're watching the live stream or the recording, I'm so glad you're here and gathering some more information about tonight's topic. You can also go to the Pillar webpage and view our past lectures in our video library. Just visit bch.org/pillar, Pillar. So with each lecture, I want to set an expectation for the evening because I am always so grateful for folks that are engaged and supporting our programming. So I want to be transparent with you all. Tonight, like every other lecture we've done, is about a pretty, heavy topic. And generally it has most people feeling some kind of way. So I want to be transparent with you all in saying that we're going to discuss something that may make people uncomfortable, and that this is just meant to be an introduction for some folks, a little bit more education for others, but it's not really meant to be an easy answer to some of the bigger topics that we discuss in our Ask an Expert series. But what it is a tool to help you find some support for yourself, to support someone in your life, a loved one, someone you work with, whether it be an adult, youth, and a way to get on a path to supportive mental health, resources, recovery, all those things that can help make, that can inform healthier choices. So with that being said, I will introduce tonight's topic and our speaker, which we're so happy to have. Tonight on Ask an Expert, we're going to be discussing gendered language and pronoun usage. What is it and why is it important? We've got Michael Chifalo from the Boulder Community Services Area Agency on Aging, and he's the LGBTQ specialist over there. I'll let Michael share a little bit more about his background and experience, and throughout the evening, we can make it a discussion. However, I almost forgot, our chat box is having a little technical difficulty. So if you wouldn't mind refreshing your page, you will see my email address. Please send any comments, questions, discussion items to my email. I will be monitoring that throughout the discussion tonight. And we will go just a little past 7 because we are getting started just a few minutes late. So with that, the topic slide will come up once again, and I'll switch spots with Michael, and I'll let him take it away. Thanks again, everyone.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Chifalo. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am the LGBTQ plus program specialist at the Boulder County Area Agency on Aging. I want to first spend a little bit of time telling you about what we do over at the Boulder County Area Agency on Aging, and specifically about our LGBTQ plus programs and services. So we've been pretty fortunate out of the 16 AAAs in the state of Colorado to be one of the only ones that's had a dedicated program to support LGBTQ plus older adults for over 20 years, actually. So in the early 2000s, we were convening in a social support kind of mechanism, convening rainbow elders. That's what they called themselves. They named themselves that some 20 years ago, and it's still stuck today. We heard from our rainbow elders that they were worried about what it would be like if they had to access any kind of senior care or any kind of services in terms of assisted living or long-term care. They were worried that they would have to retreat back into the closet. And so we realized that that was an opportunity for us as an agency to create a training program. And so thus in 2004, Project Visibility was born. And so Project Visibility is a very important training program that we offer. Originally, it was created, as I mentioned, for assisted living and long-term care communities, but now it has evolved and branched out to a cultural awareness training that is good for any service provider and, for that matter, anybody in the community as well. And so Project Visibility, again, just an important piece of getting the word out about LGBTQ plus older adults and teaching folks how to create more inclusive communities. And so we offer that training in many different forms and fashions. We can come out in person or virtually and create a customized training for any group, as well as we have a general training that occurs on a quarterly basis. And we have an online training too. So an asynchronous 30-minute start and stop training that provides a really good introductory for people. And so that's Project Visibility, our training component. I mentioned our Rainbow Elders earlier, and our Rainbow Elders are very active, and we provide social support and community education for them in the form of a supper club and a tea time. We're happy that we're able to return to some in-person events, and so we're rotating this year in 2022 between having virtual tea time and in-person supper club. And so it's been exciting to see people and get back out there again. Speaking of getting back out there again, Pride is coming up in June, and all of the Pride events are returning to in-person. And so here in Boulder County, we will have a 50-plus mixer on June 8th. And then the weekend of June 11th and 12th is going to be jam-packed full. June 11th will be Longmont Pride in the afternoon from 2 to 6. And then on Sunday, the 12th, will be Boulder Pride. And that will take place from 11 to 6:30. And so pretty excited about both of those events returning to in person.
Yeah, can I do a plug for us too?
Yeah,
BCH. Yeah, BCH will
absolutely.
be out at Pride. So come,
Great.
yeah, by our booth. We'll have all kinds of activities, some body work folks out there. Not Stop the Bleed, but like a CPR and a Stop the Bleed demonstration, as well as Narcan demonstrations and Narcan distribution at Boulder Pride on Sunday. So thanks for bringing that up, Michael. I would have totally forgotten about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really excited about Pride. And then also our biggest event is our Lavender Gala, and we hold that in December, and we'll be returning in person for that as well. So we are going to be at the brand new Nieces in Lafayette. Nieces was in Lafayette previously, moved to a new building, same management. December 4th, Sunday, December 4th from 1 to 4, we will host the Lavender Gala, and our main entertainment will be Miss Ida Bagel. And so we're excited about that as well. To keep in contact with everyone, we have a monthly newsletter as well as Facebook pages for both Project Visibility and Rainbow Elders. All of those programs are great, but we realize that there are also folks in our community that can't get to events, have fewer resources, maybe mobility issues, health complications. And so we also created our Rainbow Connections program, which is a volunteer program where LGBTQ plus or very strong allied volunteers are matched with LGBTQ plus older adults who are experiencing social isolation. So we're excited about that as well. And then in terms of the rest of the work that I do at the agency, I am the leader of our class committee, which is our JEDI work that we do, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so our class committee, culturally and linguistically appropriate services, is geared at us making sure that we are reaching out to those communities who are underrepresented and making sure that we're bringing them into the fold. And so that's the exciting work I get to do at the Boulder County AAA. And I used to be an adjunct instructor at DU, and that's where Amanda and I first met many, many years ago, it feels like.
I know, it's so crazy to say that.
Yeah. So, we're so excited to be able to continue working together, and so happy to be here tonight. In terms of just more introduction for me, I'm a cisgender gay white male. I was born in Pueblo, Colorado, And I have a bachelor's and a master's in social work from the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And I worked in domestic violence and post-adoption before working with older adults. Whew, enough about me, huh?
Yeah. It was all good. It was all good.
In terms of goals for today, we have kind of a four-parter here. We want to first create a space to examine the issues of gendered language. We want to think about how our own choices of gendered language affects other people. We want to discuss why using someone's correct and appropriate pronouns can be used as a prevention tool for mental health and substance abuse. And then finally, we want to share some promising practices for you to be able to incorporate into your daily life. Next, we have a video. I think that's the cue for it to start. So without further ado, we will watch a very short video to remind us of some important concepts in terms of gender identity. And I will be quiet now.
We asked some people in our community a simple question. What will you teach the world? Here's Tristan from the Pride Center of Edmonton.
I'd like to teach people about gender identity and how to use pronouns correctly. First off, let's talk about the difference between sex and gender identity. Sex is something that is assigned at birth. When the medical professional says, "It's a boy," or "It's a girl," they are basing this off of your physical anatomy, or your sex. Gender identity is a person's experience of their own gender. Most people's gender identity aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth. The term for this is cisgender, from the Latin cis, meaning on this side of. Someone who is transgender, or gender non-binary, however, has a gender identity that does not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. Transgender and non-binary people can experience their gender in a variety of ways. Some transgender people may identify strongly with a gender. Some may feel disconnected from masculine and feminine genders, while others may experience their gender as a combination of both. Here's a quick refresher on grammar. Pronouns are words we use to refer to someone in place of a name. Some are tied to a specific gender, like he, him, his, and she, her, hers. Others, like they, them, theirs, are gender neutral. Some transgender people will use gendered pronouns as they affirm their gender identity. However, some transgender and gender non-binary folks will use gender-neutral pronouns. It's important to consider that the pronouns that feel comfortable for one person might not be for another. Okay, so why is this important? You probably have an expectation about what pronouns people refer to you by, and so do most transgender or gender non-binary people. Using someone's pronouns correctly is important because pronouns correspond with a person's gender. When pronouns are used incorrectly, we may risk misgendering them. Misgendering is when someone uses the wrong name or pronoun to describe someone else. This can cause distress for the person who is misgendered because they may feel that their gender identity is not validated and respected. Misgendering can also create a risk to someone's safety by outing that person to others. Unfortunately, some people purposely misgender others to insult them. Using the correct name and pronoun is about showing basic respect. If you're not sure, you can just ask. A great way to ask someone's pronoun when you first meet them is to say your name, state your pronouns, then ask the person you're meeting with what their name and pronouns are. Hi, my name is Tristan. I use he, him, his pronouns. What is your name and pronouns? Hi, my name is Jordan, and I use they, them, theirs pronouns. Thank you for asking. Once you know someone's pronouns, you will know how to refer to them when speaking to others. Hey everyone, this is Jordan. They're a new friend of mine. We all make mistakes though. If you slip up, apologize, and try to avoid being defensive. Hey everyone, this is Jordan. He's a new friend of mine. They're a new friend of mine. Sorry, Jordan. No worries, thanks. Getting someone's gender right is on you, not the transgender or non-binary person. Try not to make assumptions about someone's gender identity. You don't know someone's pronouns until they tell you. Pronouns are something important that most people don't think about. However, pronouns are extra important to many transgender and non-binary folks as it affirms their gender identity. Using someone's correct pronouns is important and validating. It's easy to get it right if you avoid making assumptions. In the end, this all comes down to treating each other with a little care and respect.
Hopefully the video was helpful in setting the stage for our discussion today. And we are going to start out in terms of thinking about historically where we've been and how the evolution of language has taken place in terms of gendered language. And so thinking about some of the common terms that you might hear people use, man-made, could easily be adjusted to be gender neutral and say human made. Mankind, which you'll hear often, can also be gender neutralized by using humankind. Terms like manpower can be maybe substituted with person power, people power, staff power. You know, when people talk about manning the booth, you could say staffing the booth instead. One that I don't have on the slide that I think is pretty important, and it feels like it's part of our kind of cultural upbringing here in Colorado, but the use of guys as a general term. And so, you know, hey guys, come over here when you're just talking to a bunch of people. And so just thinking about ways that we could maybe substitute different language in there instead of using guys. I'm a big fan of folks. I like using folks in a lot of different ways, and it feels very community driven in that way. But, you know, people, peeps, lots of different ways that you can, you know, think of substituting out some of those terms that have a gender bias in them. And so in terms of thinking a little bit more about the historical context, we can think about the evolution of how we've thought as a group. And so, you know, pretty traditionally, we often used he as a way to describe a person. And so, as the example says here, you know, the employee shall provide the employer with the notice of leave as soon as possible once he becomes aware of the need. And then we shifted a couple decades ago to try to be a little more inclusive, and you started seeing people slashing things like he/she or he or she, and so that became the new way to be a little more inclusive, right? So we weren't just using the masculine pronoun, but also using the feminine pronoun. And so once he or she becomes aware of the need, and now we can think maybe even a little bit more evolved and think of being even more inclusive and including everyone, and using a gender neutral term such as they. And so once they become aware of the need. And so I think there's some challenge here in terms of, I hear a lot of folks who have been trained in the English language and my friends that might be like grammar police, you know, get kind of uptight about the idea of using a plural pronoun in a singular place. But trust me, they has been used as a singular pronoun since the beginning of time, and it's used pretty naturally for us. So, you know, here we are in this lovely studio recording this, and, you know, if someone left behind their cell phone and you weren't really sure whose cell phone it was, someone might very easily say, oh, I wonder if they're going to come back for their cell phone. And so you're using they and their in there pretty naturally. And so we don't even stumble when we think of that. And so I challenge you just to think creatively about how we've been using they as a singular pronoun for quite some time. In terms of using gender neutral pronouns, let's just talk about what pronouns are and how they are used. So pronouns are words that are used instead of a noun or a noun phrase. So here's some examples. Michael went to the store. He went to the store. Ashley picked the pen up. I picked it up. Lindsay spoke to the doctor. Lindsay spoke to them. So again, there's that, how we can use that them, they or them as a singular pronoun quite easily. So when you don't know the gender of the doctor, you can just use a gender neutral term, they or them. We talked a little bit before about singular and plural, and I think I addressed that, but you know, people are challenged by that. So just realize that we as humans are flexible, and in our nature we can learn and we can change. And so even though something might have been difficult for you to do in the past, really all it takes is a little bit of attention and some practice, and we can get used to those things. And so you know, practice helps make it easier for us. And so, you know, if you are having some difficulty with using gender neutral pronouns, one suggestion that I heard from someone that I think is a great way is to find a children's book and switch around the gender of the main character and substitute in some gender neutral terms and read the book with those terms, and that can help you to practice. And it's important to know that pronouns are not just for trans folks. We all use pronouns as a part of our language, and you can think critically about what pronouns you identify with yourself. So it's really important, I think, for us to recognize that, you know, pronoun usage really is up to the person themselves. And so it's important for us to embrace that and let people be who they are. here is a table with some common pronouns and just showing you the conjugation of how that works. And so we have he and she, it, one, they, and then there are also what are known as neopronouns. And so I have an example of one. There are multiple, dozens and dozens actually of neopronouns, neo meaning new. And Z is one of those. And so Z is another gender neutral pronoun that folks can use. And so it would be used in this way. Z laughed, I called Zer, Z's eyes gleam, that is Zer's, and Z likes herself. Now, again, when you hear that, it might sound like, oh my gosh, how complicated this is. But again, our minds are like sponges, and I do believe that we can change. And so embrace the difference and try it out a little, practice. In terms of social interactions, I think there's some important guidelines for us to think about. We want to again make this a normal, usual, everyday part of our interaction with folks. And so the best ways to do that are to make them more commonplace, and so to practice and to use them. And so I think it's important for us to create spaces where folks are identifying their pronouns so that then people feel comfortable doing it themselves. And so think about yourself. You don't have to be a transgender person to be misgendered. In fact, the story of today is not about a cisgender person, but as a young child, I often was mistaken for a girl all the time. Since I was a little baby, I had really long eyelashes, and people would come up to my mom and dad and say, "Oh, what a beautiful little girl you have." And in fact, all the way through middle school, before I went through puberty and got very hairy, and now it might not happen as frequently, but I can remember going to the roller skating rink, and if I didn't say in a deeper voice, "Boys 8," like I would get girl skates. They would give me girl skates. And so even as a cisgender person, a person whose sex assigned at birth matches their understanding of who they are internally, it was damaging to be misgendered. I didn't want to be called a girl when I wasn't. And so I think it's important for us to think about the impact of what that feels like to be correctly identified. And so, again, the more that we can create comfort for ourselves and for other people, the more inclusive we can be. And don't we want to be inclusive? It's amazing to me that we are challenged by some of these ideas when really it's just about being a kind and nice human being, really. You may not understand everything, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that that you have to be mean or negative. All right. So it's important to talk about how this impacts youth. And so, depressive and anxiety disorders are up to 3 times more likely to occur in LGBTQ plus youth than in their heterosexual cisgender counterparts. Trans youth, in fact, are up to 4 times more likely to abuse substances as an avoidance or coping strategy. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for persons 15 to 24 years old. LGBTQ plus youth are more likely to have suicidal ideation and attempt suicide than their heterosexual cisgender counterparts. And research has illustrated that the challenges and stressors that transgender youth experience in schools, families, and communities often result in the use of cigarettes, alcohol, and other substances. So we'll talk about this a little bit more.
We asked some people in our community a simple question. What will you teach
authentically and use their correct and appropriate pronouns, because it can help them to experience life in a better way. It can help mediate some of these challenging factors that could present themselves. And so we're concerned about that because we want the best for our communities. In terms of asking and apologizing, just some tips. So when we don't know someone's gender or how they prefer to be addressed, here's some do's and don'ts. Do, as I mentioned before, offer your pronouns as part of your introduction. So this invites them to be able to share theirs. And again, we may not be in practice of doing this everywhere, but the more we start to do it, the more that it'll become commonplace and become a part of our everyday interaction. And so we really should be introducing our pronouns every single time that we're introducing ourselves. This one can be controversial, but I think in some instances when you're unsure, if you have a good intention, you might want to privately clarify with others who know the person, and making sure again that you're consulting folks who are allies of that person. And so you want to also avoid pronouns and just use their name until you don't know. So that's another way of being inclusive and using their name instead of a pronoun. And so when you're unsure, that's a good practice you can do as well. We also want to continue encouraging a culture of sharing pronouns in formal settings as a standard practice. You may notice that people are doing it orally in introductions. You may also notice that many people are doing it in their email signatures now. And so other ways that we can be inclusive in that way. In fact, in written publications all over, you can do that. And then the don't on here is that you don't want to ask directly when you aren't sure. You don't want to put people on the spot and single them out. I think sometimes it's fine to ask directly in certain circumstances, not in the middle of a meeting or in a big event, but maybe if you pulled someone aside and were able to ask them privately. And many people ask, well, shoot, I made a mistake. Maybe I've misgendered someone. I'm using their incorrect pronouns. I've screwed up. What do I do now? So you want to avoid spending too much time apologizing and just make a simple statement of my apology, correct it, and then move on. Don't spend too much time trying to justify that, I'm not transphobic. I do care about you. Just make it quick and easy, apologize, correct the mistake, and move on. I think it's important to note that misgendering is a mistake that does cause harm, but anyone who makes it can fix it. And so you can get better at that by apologizing and then working harder. In terms of sharing our pronouns, again, I mentioned this already a couple times today, in professional roles like in meetings or interviews, we should all share our pronouns in our introductions to avoid misgendering or assuming gender. And when we rely on individuals to offer up their gender on their own, I mentioned this earlier, it often singles out those who do not pass as cisgender. So make it a practice for everyone. Like I said before, pronouns are not just for trans folks, they are for everyone. Some things to keep in mind. It's important to note that trans folks are not out necessarily in every aspect of their life. And so we need to be respectful of that. And so make sure that we're adjusting and shifting as needed. There are circumstances where it's important to adjust the words we use to describe a person to avoid accidentally outing them. And so trans folks should be able to have control over their own coming out process. So we want to make sure that we're supportive in that coming out process and not dictating what it should look like for them. Providing support. This is following up on some of the research that was done before, and it's important for us to recognize how the mediating factor of using someone's pronouns correctly can help people's quality of life. And so research suggests that preventing depression by fostering a sense of belonging may reduce or completely deter suicidal tendencies among LGBTQ+ youth. Normalizing asking for someone's pronouns and using preferred pronouns is a great way to help others belong. If you're a parent or adult who works with transgender, genderqueer, or gender nonconforming youth, connect with and invest in programs that can offer support and guidance to you and to the youth in your life. So connect with those community resources that are out there. And then create spaces where gender diverse youth feel safe by improving gender inclusivity. So, role modeling how to use pronouns, making sure that gender neutral language is used, orally and in print, and create that gender inclusivity for folks. Our resources for today, Amanda mentioned her program. I talked extensively about mine. A couple other important ones. Boulder County is the premier LGBTQ+ group here in Boulder County, serves the whole county. And then the Colorado Crisis Services 24-hour crisis hotline is listed there as well.
And Michael, if you just want to leave that slide up for a few minutes, that's got my email address on it. right? My email's on there.
Yes,
Okay.
your email is on there.
Sorry, there's just a little bit of a delay from
Yeah.
the screens. My email is there. If anyone in our audience has a question or a comment or something they'd like to discuss a little further with Michael right now, go ahead and shoot me an email. And just again, our chat box is not working correctly this evening. So go ahead and email me. I am monitoring my inbox and am happy to chat a little further. I have one, actually I have a couple, and then one has already come in if you're ready for some questions.
Sure,
Okay,
let's do
give
it.
me 1 second. Okay. Oh, we've got a couple. Okay, awesome. Can a person identify as multiple pronouns like they, he, or they, she, for example?
Great question. And absolutely, yes. And so some folks will indicate that they are fine with either they, or if there's a slash in something else, with something else. So often folks are okay with they or he, and they or she as well.
And just to kind of piggyback on that, generally people will offer that up, would you say, if that's how they identify, if they lean more towards they or more towards the he side of pronouns? Just because we've gotten a little bit of feedback sometimes that can be really confusing, and when people are potentially already uncomfortable navigating just proper pronoun usage and inclusivity, they feel like that's kind of a curveball they get thrown to. It's like, wait, they and he, or they and she. So what's been your experience when folks, like, if they prefer one or the other, or how they kind of convey that?
Yeah, so I think it's really individualized, and different people, respond differently to that. But I think in most cases, and if you want to look at it in terms of like your percentage of ability to be correct, the more pronouns that they use, the less of a chance you have of making a mistake. So when someone uses
True.
both they and he, my experience has been that they want you to feel comfortable using either, and also using both. So
Sure.
I think that there are also some folks who identify as using all pronouns, and so that is also another chance for you to not make any mistakes. So
Sure.
it's really great to think about that. And then also thinking about rotating throughout. So most folks who use all pronouns would like you to switch it up and use them at different times.
Okay. Thank you. And I will totally own that I didn't offer up mine when I introduced myself. And it's definitely something you do have to work on and just kind of make it more routine. Mine are she, her, hers.
Thank you.
But it, even, being in circles where in meetings we do generally go around and name, role, pronouns, it still definitely takes some practice. Okay, another question here. Any tips on how to support someone if they come out to you as trans, as a transgender person, either a close friend or a family member or a client? How can we support people in that moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing to do is just to be there with the person and to be able to authentically listen to them tell their story, be able to reflect back on them about, maybe how difficult it was to go through this, but how great it is that they are being able to find themselves. So I think it's important to be affirming and validating. I wouldn't spend too much time warning them of all the difficulties that they're going to face, because I think that
Sure.
trans and non-binary folks know about that already, and it feels like it puts a little bit of a negative spin on it. And then also I think be open to resources as well. So, ask them about what resources they've explored. Have they connected with any, groups? For trans and non-binary folks, support is really important, and finding others like them is also really important. And so support groups are really key for that too. So I would say be there with them authentically, and then be open to helping facilitate connection to resources.
Fantastic. That's very helpful. So kind of an extension of that, but I don't know, maybe not really. I don't know. So seeing as you now work with an older population, what has been your experience in working with people that really didn't have control over their coming out process? I'm sure you've come across that in your role with the AAA.
Yeah, so when we think about our older adults, their experiences were different than a lot of our middle-aged and younger folks are today. And in fact, life is easier for LGBTQ folks today because of the work that occurred with our older adults. But it was a very different environment for people before. People learned to be in the closet as a survival mechanism. When you look back historically at some of the things that were going on, with like the lavender scare and LGBTQ folks being fired from federal government jobs.
Sorry, real quick, can you explain the lavender scare?
Yeah, so the lavender scare was a time when LGBTQ folks were outlawed from working in the federal government. And so if you were outed or, your identity was discovered, you were fired. And so pretty scary for folks to go through that. And so, again, your survival mechanism was to be in the closet. And so, lots of stuff that goes along with that in terms of just having to hide your identity.
Yeah. And from a social work perspective, I'm always thinking, well, like what was the impact? What was the trauma, right? And I'm sure decades worth, right, of not being able to live your life in an authentic way.
Right.
And how would you say that the older generations are doing with the usage of pronouns being more in the spotlight?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that varies for folks as well. I think we have, a chunk of people who have some difficulty because this wasn't their understanding of gender before. And so it's new for them to think about, multiple identities within something that was very, binary opposition before. And so some are challenged by it. Mm-hmm. I think more so, though, people are ready and willing to learn and to connect with folks. And so I think that, language and terminology is a way that we can make that intergenerational connection between, older adults, LGBTQ plus older adults and LGBTQ plus youth. And so I think that's one of those ways we can do that is so helping, the others understand, what it's like for me. So
yeah,
I think that's important.
And that actually brings up something that I know, in Pillar, we've heard it just kind of across, different organizations and with different clientele. How do you address the issue when people are really resistant of no, there's men and there's women and that's it. And there's, people that just really aren't quite open to it, to the, people using they or them or some of those, like you said, those newer concepts.
Yeah. I think it's important to frame it in a way where, there's really none of us who understand everything in life. And so, there are just some things that you may not understand, but we have to respect and allow people to make those decisions for themselves. If someone is telling you that they identify differently than what you expect them to or how you've traditionally, you really just have to go with them. I mean, gender identity is something that's internal, and really each individual is the only one who fully understands who they are in terms of that. And so I think many times we don't understand things, but we just kind of got to go with it. Sure. I go back to this idea of that, it's more important to be kind and respectful than it is to challenge everything that you don't understand about. Mm-hmm. And by the way, if you don't understand about it or you feel uncertain about it, maybe that's your opportunity to go do some work on your own. Maybe that's your opportunity to seek out some resources on your own and learn more about it, because maybe you don't understand enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree that it's certainly a learning opportunity. Okay, a couple more. Oh, kind of piggybacking on that, can you explain the Z or Zir or Zim pronoun just a little further?
So the neopronouns, I only chose one on there. If you want to do a quick Google search on neopronouns, you'll get lists of, like I mentioned before, dozens and dozens of different pronouns that are gender neutral that could be used instead of they, them, theirs. And so
Okay.
Just another way of utilizing a gender neutral pronoun.
Great. Thank you. Is it okay to ask somebody to explain their pronouns?
I think what's more okay than asking them to explain their pronouns is asking them to share their pronouns so that you can then follow their lead and use what pronouns they want you to. And so I wouldn't spend too much time asking them to explain that, other than, we understand that he and she are the traditional like binary opposition and that they, them, or any of the other neopronouns are gender neutral. And so I wouldn't spend too much time putting someone on the spot and making them explain, but I would ask them to share them.
Sure. Makes sense. Well, and I think that further illustrates how to create a safe space, right? And to just, like you said, go with it and just kind of lean into what they're telling you and what they're feeling, which I think is really important when we're talking about prevention and from a youth standpoint of, youth and the teenage years, that's just such an awkward time and a time of growth, and letting people be safe and helping them to feel comfortable in their own skin is impacts us across the lifespan, right? So
Absolutely.
let's see, what if people don't want to share their pronouns? Have you ever come across that?
Yes. So some people may not want to share their pronouns, and that's up to them as well. And so, I think that's where we fall back on using gender neutral pronouns anyway. So a couple ways that we mentioned earlier that can be, if you don't know someone's gender, you can use they, them, and that's gender neutral. You also could use their name. So I think in terms of inclusion, I think there's a couple levels of inclusion, and the first level is being able to look at someone and to be able to acknowledge them, that good old eye contact. The next level is using their name and using their name correctly. And so this applies to trans and non-binary folks too, who may have had a name change. And so it's really important to utilize the name that they use, and maybe not the former name. And then that third level is really using their correct pronouns. And so being able to think about how to be inclusive, and it may be difficult for us, but that's okay. I mean, it's not really about us. And so it's the same thing with like names. If someone has a difficult name to pronounce, like, it's not your place to say, oh, that's too difficult for me to pronounce, I'm going to call you this instead. It's really you need to go home and practice. Go in front of the mirror. Right. If that's a difficult name to pronounce, and it's important for you to be inclusive to that person and use their name correctly, then go home and practice it.
Right.
Say it over and over until you can use it. And then be proud of when you can use it the right way.
Yeah. And really see somebody in that way.
For sure.
So that's actually a really good segue into the next question. We've heard the terms, or the terms like dead name and preferred pronouns have started, they're starting to become part of the vernacular, but I've also heard that putting preferred before the word pronouns is no longer not acceptable, but that's really kind of being phased out.
Yeah.
So what is the new, or what is the appropriate way to say these are my pronouns, when before maybe you would have said my preferred pronouns are?
Right. Yeah. So in terms of preferred pronouns, we are trying to move away from that language and just state that, these are my pronouns, instead of preferred pronouns. Again, that kind of feels like it's the old school way of that we used to look at sexual orientation by saying like sexual preference, and it feels like it indicates choice. And I think most folks feel like that it's not necessarily a choice. And so I think just my pronouns are And I noticed even in our presentation, like we had preferred pronouns in there too. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And when I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, we probably should address that. And so, yeah, we're trying to move away from saying preferred pronouns and just what are your pronouns?
Gotcha. Makes sense.
And was there a first part to that question?
Yeah, the term dead name.
Oh, yes, dead naming. So I was just talking earlier about like former names, and I didn't use the term dead naming because that can be controversial as well. But what dead naming is when you use the former name of someone, and often it's used in a very disrespectful way because it's used in a way of I'm going to invalidate the new name that you want to use by only using the old one. Now you have to recognize that in some situations that's going to be difficult for people because maybe they've been using the old name for a really long time and it's hard for them. And so I think there's a little bit of grace that needs to be given in there, but I think it's about the intent. It really is about the intent. So are you trying to invalidate and erase their identity by dead naming, or are you really just having a difficult time, making the change?
Sure. And dead naming is the appropriate term to use. Someone's
Yes,
dead name if they've switched. Okay.
Yes. So if you use the former name that's no longer used, that would be considered dead naming.
I've learned so much over the course of this evening. Just checking my email real quick. We don't have any other questions, but I'll give folks just a couple minutes, see if anything's kind of come up for anybody. It's 5 to 7, so we do have a few more minutes. Do you have any specific recommendations for like supports or therapies to help specifically trans folks with like better mental health supports or anything like that?
Yeah, so we mentioned out Boulder County before, but we probably should have had on the list as well. Queer Asterisk is a mental health support for trans and queer folks, and really great in terms of that. The Transgender Center of the Rockies also is a good support for folks. And so again, like making connections with people, I think is just really key, to combat that isolation that many people feel. Because it's amazing that you'll hear across the board from everybody. And I think I felt this way too, as a youngster too, that you feel like you're the only one who's going through this.
Sure.
And then when you get to meet other folks that have gone through the same thing and you're like, oh, wow, there's other people like me.
Yay.
And it just feels so validating to be able to see that, hey, you know what? You're not the only one who's going through this.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, real quick. So if folks are looking for resources that we've mentioned tonight but aren't up on the resource slide, please don't hesitate. Reach out to me or Michael. We can absolutely help point you in the right direction. But what you bring up about isolation, I mean, that's so true for like addiction as well, right? That's where addiction is allowed to grow. And the answer to so many of these bigger issues where people are struggling is connection and community. We preach the gospel of community for folks in recovery as a part of Pillar's mission to get folks connected. And yeah, definitely people who are, part of all more marginalized, historically oppressed populations, having that shared experience is really, really powerful.
Yeah.
So let me just double check, see if I'm missing anything or we have any other questions. No, I think that's everything that people wanted to cover so far. Really, really great information, Michael. Thank you so, so much. Such a relevant, timely topic. Again, thank you everyone who has tuned in. Whether you're watching the live stream or the recorded version of tonight's lecture. Also, if you either way, live stream or recorded lecture, the link to our post lecture survey should be right under the screen. So if you all wouldn't mind just taking 2 minutes and filling that out, We are grant funded, so getting that information is really fabulous to bring back to our funders. And shout out to the city of Boulder, who makes these lectures possible through generous grants. And, shout out to Stone Cottage Studios, which I don't think I do enough, where we record from. So thank you again, Michael. Very engaging, very informative. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll hope to see you next time.
Thanks so much for having me, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you.